So recently, Apple announced some controversial changes that are coming, to say the least. The page refers to it as child protection and privacy, or child safety, something to that effect.
Expanded protections for children.
Right. The overall gist is that it's a multifaceted program to help combat a combination of child abuse material and other things that would be considered explicit. And I'm a little fuzzy on the full details on the latter part, but there are multiple parts to it. The part that I was most interested in talking about, because it's the part that I have two very dissonant sets of thoughts surrounding, are the on-device attempted detection of child abuse images. There's a different acronym for it. It's CSAM, I believe.
Yes.
I don't remember what that stands for.
Child sexual abuse material.
Okay. And so this material, just for a quick explainer, there's an organization that maintains a database of these known images that are shared. And Apple's program, if you use iCloud photo storage, attempts to, on-device, look for hashes of these matching photos from the database. So it's not actually doing like photo recognition or attempting to understand the actual content of the photos. It's looking for an exact match of an exact image maintained in that database. And then the threshold is not outlined, but there's a threshold of matching images before an account is flagged, at which point it's human reviewed for being either a false positive or a true positive before it's reported to authorities. So in a nutshell, that's the way that component works. The two kind of dissonant thoughts that I have are, one, as a human being and as a parent, I'm absolutely in favor of trying to combat said material.
100%. I mean, absolutely.
But then as a privacy advocate, or general focus on security in some fashion, I'm concerned about what it could be expanded to include.
Like, is this basically sort of a slippery slope argument?
It is, and there's been some discussion about that's alarmist in theory, on the one hand, and of course plenty of advocates have spoken out saying it's the exact definition of a slippery slope.
Well, you can be on a slippery slope without slipping or falling off. Yes, I get the concern. So, yeah, the thing about this is Apple's a company, and you can choose to not use their products, right? Or am I derailing? Am I derailing?
True to an extent, yes.
All right. Well, let's keep going because we'll get there.
Yeah. Well, I mean that kind of sets the stage for my what I wanted to kind of navigate and talk about, and we can pick apart the different pieces, and I'm fine starting there, because it kind of there are two components to that, right? You can choose to not use Apple's products and services, or you can choose to use Apple's products and disable iCloud photo storage, or iCloud photo library, I guess is the official term, which disables that checking as well. But at the same time, there's a case to be made where you may not necessarily be able to make those choices either. I mean, yes, in a free market, you can always choose the competition. But what happens with one product or service tends to proliferate through other products and services as well, from competitors, for various reasons. So while you may be able to choose not to use Apple devices and services, it would not be surprising to have something similar on every available mobile communication device. And it would be a tough sell to say that you could elect to go through modern life without a mobile communication device.
I've got a friend who's using a flip phone, so it's possible.
It's definitely possible. There are plenty of, you can make a typical pros cons list and trade-offs and everything else and go that route.
But that's not what this is about.
Right. And to further elaborate there, like, this is not something from a concept that is new. Every place that you store photos online is doing something like this anyway, because they are legally obligated to do so to protect themselves from hosting such material as well. So it's not foreign. It's not something that is overly concerning from the standpoint of what is being done to attempt to combat this type of material. What makes this a little bit trickier is that it's enabling on-device resources without the full details being really explained and ramifications being upfront about what that means going forward. You know, is it
what's in the secret?
An opt-in kind of thing, or is it an opt-out kind of thing?
I mean, but this is typical Apple. They never
True.
tell us what's in the secret sauce. And I mean, I understand why they want to announce it, and I understand why there are people that are, there's some controversy over it, and it's because we're talking about a controversial topic. It's a combination of, anytime you look for safety or protection, you have to give up a freedom. And whether it's a government freedom or a freedom on your device, you're giving something up for protection. So that being said, the details will...
I do think the reason there's so much concern or controversy about this particular program is because Apple has not historically had a good track record with saying no to positions of authority in a lot of ways. Like, there's nothing... Once the technology exists and is enabled, there's no reason you couldn't say, all right, now I want this database of anti-government images also being checked for. Or this database of other people, or whatever database exists, you can create a list of hashes that then feed into the same algorithm for checking.
Yeah, but I mean, Apple's the only one who has made a big deal of saying no to the FBI. Like publicly saying no to the FBI.
But they've also had to very publicly acquiesce to the Chinese government relating to the App Store.
That, true.
So, while in the States there are certain levels of protections for a corporate entity in relation to its intellectual property, we're just not at a point where... I guess let's change that slightly. It's not that we're not at a point where it couldn't be true. It's that we don't really have a solid track record of Apple winning all of those arguments to have the trust and faith in Apple when they say this is the only thing that it will be used for, and we'll say no. And that's the part that is concerning.
Right. So if we somehow could know that the way this is being implemented, that it could only be used for these type of images, we'd all be okay. And I'm just, that's a hypothetical. Sometimes hypotheticals aren't worth talking about. But suffice to say, if this is all, if you knew that this was not a slippery slope, there would be no controversy.
I don't know if I would say that, because there's also a level of controversy on how it's being done. We're pretty much accustomed to when you send something into a public sphere, you expect it to be observed, scanned, whatever.
It's there forever. It's there forever.
Right. But one of the selling points of using iCloud as a service is the thought that your data and everything associated with that service is encrypted and private and accessible by you, which is also not entirely true. And so if you're building up this idea of the service as being, a vault of sorts, and then you prove that you can poke a hole in it at any given time, that is concerning as well from a just general privacy standpoint. And that's going outside the scope of this particular issue, because I don't believe it's ever been stated that your photos were encrypted as part of a backup and accessible only by you anyway.
Yeah, the ones that, well, so it talks about messages, and it talks about, we know that we could say specifically messages are encrypted end to end. So it encrypts on the device, sends through the network, and then decrypts on the receiving device. And this is saying that, on your device, we're going to be scanning for things that something, illegal material, or this specific type of illegal material. So it does, it's still encrypted end to end, but now you have devices that are going to be actively scanning for it.
And so that argument I've also seen floated as being an issue, because it's now basically turning your device into a way to invade privacy. And of course the argument is trying to be more general. The argument is trying not to focus on just this particular implementation, because the idea is that this implementation could be expanded. So if the scope does get expanded, then this is a huge privacy nightmare, or could be a huge privacy nightmare, I guess is the better phrasing.
Right.
Because the other part of this, so one of the things that has received less controversy, but it's another facet of this program, for any account that is managed as part of a household that is a minor, you can enable parental controls on messages to block explicit content that comes through iMessage, and have it subsequently notify the parent when it is attempted to be sent or viewed.
That's currently in place?
That's part of this suite of initiatives.
Yeah, okay. I was just making sure that we're still talking about that. I love the emojis that they have in the article. It shows you, are you allowed to look at this? And it's got that emoji where it's like, It's like got a thumb and finger on its chin.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that one too. That one doesn't feel, or not the emoji, but the feature. That feature doesn't feel wrong to me at all. I think that's just general. It falls in line with what I would expect expansion of parental controls to be. I don't know that I necessarily agree with it from a parenting philosophy standpoint. I'm also not at a point where I have to think too much about it yet. So, I don't know for sure if I agree with the methodology, but I can see it being a positive feature. I guess for that, it depends a lot on what it actually detects and how it detects it and what's it really doing. And I haven't read enough about the implementation to know what's going on there.
Yeah, it specifically says sensitive photos and videos show the private body parts that you cover with bathing suits. I love the bathing suits.
So it's basically doing on-device photo identification for messages.
And then it goes and says, it's not your fault, but sensitive photos and videos can be used to hurt you. the person, and this might not want it seen. It could have been shared without them knowing.
Yeah, so that I think is a positive feature.
Yeah.
Especially given the fact that, to one of the things that people don't think about, as a minor, if you share a photo of yourself or someone else, and if that particular photo is including someone who is underage, then you are able to be prosecuted under the fullest extent of the law as a sexual predator.
Yeah. I mean, if it's like, if you're under 18 and you share a nude, that's child pornography.
Yeah, and that basically takes care of screwing you over for the rest of your life, even if it was a dumb mistake at the time.
Yeah.
And so I'm in favor of that facet of the changes. And I'm in favor of the protection against the CSAM. And I think they actually just generally pronounce it CSAM. Protections.
I'd like to call it CSAM.
I'm really concerned about the implications for how it can change, and I would be less concerned if not for the previous administration, basically.
You know, when I see, looking at it, I'm like, this is great. Like, it is great. It's truly great. And there's nothing bad about it. But like you said, the implications, or what can it be used for, how can this be applied to other areas? And I think even like in the United States, it's not actually, I don't know that I would even have a concern as a U.S. citizen. But you brought up China, and remembering what was going on with the App Store in Hong Kong and the demonstrations they were doing, yeah, that could be a big problem. There'd be other parts of the world where they could use this for truly nefarious reasons.
And I would have tended to agree with the thought of, as a U.S. citizen, I probably wouldn't care if it were expanded, until seeing how misinformation and propaganda were leveraged in a way that's really just kind of fucked up people's minds for a while at this point. And that's in a country that is supposed to be more welcoming of different opinions and philosophies and things as a whole, and we've illustrated that we are absolutely not.
Yeah, I was just saying that. It turns out we're not. That's not the case. And if you had any doubts in your mind, January 6th should have quelled those doubts.
Well, and so this is exactly why the technology here concerns me a bit. So we'll back it up slightly to say that I also have to applaud this as a way of not creating a hole, a massive hole in the iCloud services itself, because it does seem like this is the most privacy-centric way to allow for scanning photos that reside within a user's iCloud account without actually scanning photos, and looking through all photos, and just having a centralized photo image store that everything is open and available, and it has to go through this process. The way it works by leveraging hashes means that it's either looking for the exact match of a photo, and it's only looking for that signature of the photo, and it's not actually going through any other data provided. So at a high level, it does seem to be probably the most private way to do this type of activity, at least the most private thing that I could think of. So on the one hand, I do applaud the attempt. My biggest fear is that in a few years, we see the previous president attempt to run again and win, and then expand things even in the States to those who spread any type of anti-administration photography. Or even, who's to say that it couldn't do word matching?
Yeah, I was kind of wondering if like any word matching would be a part of this because, you know, the thought is like, if somebody's speaking inappropriately to my child, I guess there's some other things in place for that, but you can have basically a white list of contacts and so forth, but certain.
My understanding is that nothing is happening based on content other
Right.
than the images themselves.
Right, and it's even. I was looking at some of the technical material, and it was even saying there's like a threshold of matches that have to, or Apple can't access metadata or visual derivatives for match CSAM images until a threshold of matches is exceeded for an iCloud Photos account.
Right. And nothing states what that threshold is, but I do note that it was quoted that the likelihood of a false positive was somewhere in the 1 in a trillion, I think is what their material states.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, time will tell if that's accurate. And the benefit...
Yeah, 1 in a trillion.
The benefit for Apple is that there's an internal human review first, and so if they have a high threshold of false positives, they can adjust the threshold.
So it's not really anything it's nothing that's listed or that was made public that is of concern. It's like the what if.
Yes. Everything that I personally have any concern on surrounds the what if. Like everything that was announced, I'm okay with. I may not like that you could retroactively scan my photo library for matching photos from a database just in general, but that's also a what if. Like I don't remember the organization that runs this particular database. Like for that source, no problem. Obviously, you could extend that to be, a concern for what if that particular source was hacked and a bunch of general images were uploaded in order to create matches to flag accounts. And I mean, you can come up with a scenario where this is still potentially problematic, but only problematic in a hassle type of way. It creates a burden. Nothing about this particular program I find problematic. It's all about if Apple is not able to say no to everyone on expansion, that becomes a problem.
Right. So if you're Apple, how do you protect yourself for that scenario? Because I don't think that they want to be those people. They don't want to be that company.
I don't think you can, unfortunately. I think that's kind of the reason it is so problematic. Because there's nothing that you can do as a company that could stop a lawmaker or a lawmaking body to say, all right, fine, you don't want to do it based on request. We're going to force you to do it via law. Granted, that does require, enough people, a majority of that lawmaking body to pass said law. I mean, but it's not far-fetched.
Right. I was going to say if they keep voting to renew the Patriot Act, it's not that far-fetched.
Right. And so you think about the number of countries that could have impacts from. Every individual company could make it illegal to import a device that doesn't conform to the requirements of this new law. Or in the case of the United States, they could just say, well, you can't operate if you don't conform to this law.
But they could have always done that, even without this, without this feature, without this new service. They could have done that anyway.
Right. The concerning part, the alarmist group, I guess if you want to refer to it that way, the reason they are so outspoken is because in the past, all of this has been done server side to what extent available. You own the server. You should absolutely be checking for illegal material on the servers you own and operate. That's your responsibility. You're selling a device to an end user. That end user should have to consent to an invasion of what is stored on said device if they own it. If they're leasing it, then there's a question of ownership to an extent. And if they're renting it, then obviously there's a different question of ownership. So the reason this, from a technical perspective, becomes more controversial is because now you're proving that it is possible to do something like this and walk that line between just complete invasion of privacy by running, an agent or something on a personal computer to, okay, in my operating system, I could have this mechanism checking for images from this database based on its signature. Well, that doesn't feel as much like I'm forcing my users once they run my OS to run an agent that scans every photo that they have stored on the device. There's a different level of ability to market it in a way to protect people, I suppose, is a way to think of it. But you're illustrating to potentially savvy lawmakers that, hey, this is something that's a possibility. It could be leveraged in a way that benefits law enforcement or that benefits whatever political action group that's spending enough money to have, 90% of the politicians in their pocket. Like there's a difference in the way it's being done that doesn't completely eradicate the illusion of privacy and choice that could very well create that pushing force on the slippery slope, if that makes sense.
Right, it's the pre-slippery slope.
Yeah, basically. It's something that I have a tough time really wrapping my head around the differences because I haven't read a full technical deep dive anywhere yet. I've just kind of scanned at the high level what a lot of it is. But there's a very big difference between matching signatures from a database versus running an agent that's constantly scanning something, just in theory, in premise. And if you're running an agent, I would expect most people would want to kill the agent, whereas if you're matching a set of signatures in a database, most people are not as inclined to view that as an invasion of privacy, I don't believe.
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that's a
I mean,
toss.
I was just going to say, is it an invasion of privacy because you're paying X amount of money to have an account on those servers? You don't own those servers, but that's your account. Is it an invasion of privacy to match? Well, it's like...
Well, you don't have to be paying money to use iCloud Photos.
That's true. But then again, then it's like, well, these are our servers, and you're using this service for free, and this is what we do on our servers. And so, point being is, I think you sort of like, there's an illusion there. You mentioned that there's an illusion of privacy, and then there's the I don't know what the opposite of illusion or it's the reality of that. This has been going on for a while, and if you were to store illegal images on their servers, you're probably going to get caught.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to kind of summarize it is that every company should be scanning for illegal material through their services. The promise of having your photos on your devices, regardless of device, relayed or synced through the iCloud photo library is a service that Apple offers, and that means that your photos do traverse their servers, and therefore they have to have some level of checking for illegal material. So this isn't strange from that premise. And it's fairly ingenious from the standpoint that they're not just saying every photo you upload we're going to scan and try to match what's in the photo through just machine learning photo scanning of some level. we want to protect your privacy from, your photos as a whole, assuming that your photos are not illegal material. And so the way we're doing it is to use this recognized official source of child sexual abuse material. We compare signatures of photos to that database. We don't actually compare photos. We don't look for artifacts in photos that could be manipulated or false positives from that standpoint. The way a signature is created, it has to be that exact photo. It could be that same photo cropped a little bit, and it should still generate a slightly, and actually I think generates still the same signature if it's the same photo cropped. I think it's only if it's a different photo that it generates a different signature, even though it could be a different photo of the same subject. So there's a level of, this is a fairly ingenious way to ensure that we're not looking at all of your other photos. We're only looking for these officially identified photos that are known to be in this database. And that's why I'd say that it's kind of an ingenious way to maintain a level of privacy. Everything from the privacy angle, for me, extends into, all right, great. What if this other source becomes a database of images that you scan for, and it's nothing but a specific group of memes that are anti-government, or this is a source based on headshots of executives that companies that we don't like, or pick a topic, but you could create a database that would have, or maybe a database of employee photos from X companies. Maybe that's a better option. So these companies have been proven to be difficult to work with for an administration's purposes, whatever those purposes might be. So get a full database of those employee photos, and then you look for that or something else. Like, you take your pick, but you could create a database of anything you want to create signatures and then expand the program.
You create a database of hate crime imagery.
And see, personally, I'd be okay with that. But see,
we'd be okay with that. No. I'm saying I'm throwing that in there because we would be okay with that.
Right.
And it's just
the concern the concern is just what could some group do that could turn around and make it not okay. And so maybe a better example, just to illustrate the purpose. Let's just say that you have a group of people assembled at a rally, and you have street cameras or body cams or just whatever surveillance of that area. Those photos are put into a database, and then that database, anything where those photos are shared, becomes a matching algorithm here. And so you have a group of people on the other side of it, in this case, let's just say law enforcement, even though I don't want to pick on law enforcement too much. It's just that would be the most likely scenario, saying if these images are shared, flag them so that we can go after these people for just being as a part of this group. So maybe not to the surveillance photos, but social media photos. You can create a database of social media photos from the protesters present. That would be a more likely scenario.
So I think this is a bit different, because if you have photos being shared in a particular way, like through social media, this has nothing to do with what Apple's implementing here. Like social media, it all fits in the category of photos being scanned on servers that end users don't own. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
So Snapchat. It's not what they're presenting today.
Well,
but
I'm sure that
the theory or the argument is that you can take any subset of images and create a database of those images and their signatures. So maybe it's not photos shared on social media, but it's
somewhere.
You manage to get photos from a suspect's phone, or just someone that you arrested and downloaded their photos because you had a warrant or could. Then you could create a database of those, make the signatures, and anybody that they've shared a photo with, you could theoretically flag that account. Like the technology allows for that level of flexibility, and that's the part that I believe becomes the slippery slope argument.
See, I don't think any of the technology that Apple's using is particularly new. Like, I think they're all doing this server side for some time now. I think where Apple has had to take the next step is that if you use iMessage, then your text and your photos are encrypted end to end, and there's no way to know. And if you never put any of those photos that get sent through messages in your iCloud photo library, they're never going to be detected. And to maintain that level of privacy, they have to use on-device scanning. They've created a scenario where they have aided people in sharing content that should not exist, and now they have to undo that. Whereas if you were using some other messaging service that doesn't have end-to-end encryption, then it wasn't. Those services didn't have that type of issue, and I think that might be part of the motivation for these features.
So the CSAM photo detection is only in iCloud Photos. That part is not in iMessage. The iMessage part is just understanding that the photo is explicit.
So nothing that gets sent in messages is ever going to be reported.
Correct. It's relying on it being saved to the device and then synced through iCloud Photos. Because if you disable iCloud Photos, then the CSAM detection is actually disabled as well.
Right. So were they not doing this before? Server side? In your iCloud photo library?
I don't know to what extent they could do it unless there was reason to decrypt some level of content or some reason to investigate an account.
Right. Basically, I'm looking for the ways, like, how is this normalized? How is this, like, basically looking for the ideas, like, we're about to be on a slippery slope where, like, I'm taking that notion and be like, no, we've been on this slippery slope for a bit. Like, we've always been on this slippery slope.
Yeah, and so the easy argument there is that every place that you transmit data should be doing this. Flickr definitely has been, Google Photos, Facebook, Twitter, like you name it. Any other service has been doing this. I can practically guarantee it. If not, then shame on them. And Apple's basically catching up to everyone else and saying they're going to be proactive about it instead of relying on some other level of notification or something else. Like, in a nutshell, that's what it boils down to. Which is why, like, personally, I have no complaints at all about any of the stuff that they've announced. Where the complaints come in, or not the complaints, because again,
I have no
complaints. Where the concerns come in is that because this is so high profile and so public, and so many people are talking about the what ifs, it creates an environment where it is more likely for a government to take notice and say, hey, here's a way we could do something that benefits us leveraging this same idea.
So I guess the question is, are the John Grubers and the Rene Ritchies asking Apple for their canned PR responses to these questions yet?
So I know Gruber has a phenomenal article that outlines it. I haven't read it in detail yet. I intend to include it with the show notes just because I think it's relevant to do so. And I know that Rene uploaded a video today or yesterday. I have not had a chance to look at it either. I don't expect the canned PR answers are there. But everything that I've seen in general from their social media accounts indicates, thoughtful examination and understanding of the idea. And it seems to be fairly supportive. I will say what I've seen from Renee, I tend to agree with a bit more. And again, I haven't read either or seen any of them in detail. But one of the things that Renee mentioned was, are there other ways to maintain an additional level of privacy that maybe helps stop the concerns from privacy advocates? Because one of the big concerns is just the methodology of putting something into a device after the fact. So like if you bought your device 2-3 years ago, this wasn't a thing, and now Apple can just arbitrarily turn on this thing and you don't agree to this level of scanning on your device that you've purchased. Like that's an argument that's out there, not one that I've put much stake in.
No, because you don't have to update. You just have to, be annoyed by the red dot with the 1 in it on the settings app.
Well, that depends. You may have to update for other concerns. So
it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
But there's always trade-offs.
There is still a legitimate argument to be made that if I buy something and it's mine physically, why am I leasing or agreeing to this other level of non-ownership on the software that I'm running on this physical device that I can't run any other software on?
Yeah,
but that's a whole long-standing other argument.
Right. There's a carrot with at the end of a stick, and it's called software updates, and it's like if you want these new features, new security. But Apple will still issue security updates for older OSs when nothing else is being updated for quite some time. So the idea of you have to update is, you don't. But I get the alarmist concerns, and I'm glad there are people out there that are asking these questions and bringing up these potential issues. And I think they need to be doing that. And there's this group of people that do that. Thank you for doing that, because I look at this and I say this is a great idea. I understand that we could be on a slippery slope because of this idea, but it's not it's not a fight or an argument, or it's a topic that I want to address when we get to it.
Well,
and we're not there.
And it's the same thing where, like, as a generally decent human being, you tend to not be concerned about most classes of criminal law, right? There's a general consensus that if you're a good person and you're going about your normal day doing things, you probably don't really care what the laws state. But that doesn't mean that the law couldn't be passed that does impact you and you not be well-versed or knowledgeable enough to understand how that impacts you. And so it's the same kind of argument on, yes, this is great, but I can see potential for it to be leveraged in a way that you don't intend, which is fine with the answers you give today, but may not be fine with the answers that come tomorrow. And that's where a lot of that's the same general mentality that creates any level of concern from most advocates for a topic, right? It's never about this thing today really rubs me the wrong way. It's I can see how this can be changed or manipulated in a way that targets a group, and that bothers me.
Yeah. It's, it's a classic, do we throw the baby out with the bathwater? And I'm going to argue no. And I understand it's like, well, one, I don't really have a choice. Like the only choice I have is like, do I update, do I buy another Apple product? Those are the choices that I have. I don't have a choice as to what Apple does. I mean, I could make myself, like, oh no, don't do this thing. But I was like, well, no, I actually do want you to do this thing. But, the idea is like, do it for just this issue. Do it for just, child safety. But don't do it for government protests in Hong Kong. Well, yeah. But then there's like a whole list of things like that. So I don't.
Yeah, it's like I would be completely on board to help squash what is definitely propaganda material from hate groups. But in the United States, technically there's a level of protection for certain types of media, whether you agree with it or not. And so the freedom of speech is generally called into question when you're talking about propaganda.
See, and that's where you have to fight the more difficult fight, which is create better people, educate people. That's the much more difficult solution to the problem, but it's the better solution.
And I want to also provide the less public or less popular opinion or thought process. There are some people who have a mental or psychological inability to distinguish certain things, where understanding right and wrong becomes practically impossible without guidance or oversight. There is a group of those people that could very well be looking at imagery and having no emotional reaction to, that would then be subsequently targeted by this type of thing. Is that a positive or a negative? Well, it's positive because it gets the exploitation of children out of the sphere of the public as a whole. Like anything to mitigate that is a positive. I guess the point that I'm making is that there are some things that we have identified as neurological deficiencies or in some level a biological problem, something that a person cannot control, that also plays a role in the seeking out of and distribution of imagery, that while it's not positive, it's not something that we should not be trying to squash. There is a level of what we need to be doing is not targeting those individuals for persecution, but targeting them for getting the assistance they need as well. So I guess the way I'm trying to phrase it is that there's a level of not only educate people and help people understand and be better from like the hate crime perspective or the hate speech perspective, but also target and help those people who are unable to understand the different things that they either see or engage in or do that they have no level of control over themselves. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to put enough caveats on it to actually explain it, but this goes back to the educational background in psychology. There are people who cannot help themselves, and those people do need help to be better people.
Right. I mean,
and
anybody
that,
who's
in a nutshell, is what I'm trying to explain.
I believe that anyone engaging in this sort of activity has a sickness. It's not there's an issue. There's a mental issue there. There's a sickness there, and it's not a criminal issue. It's not a deviance issue.
See, and I don't necessarily think that it's that cut and dry. I think there are some who engage that it is a deviance issue, and maybe not. Me personally, I'm not wanting to pass any level of judgment there. Only thing that I'm wanting to make sure is emphasized is that there is a responsibility on our part not only to educate people, but also to help those who need some level of mental or psychological assistance as well to be a better person.
In our society, that is what that is supposed to be a byproduct and benefit of creating a society.
And every society, unfortunately, has its own sets of rules surrounding that. And sometimes you're in a society that doesn't necessarily match those sets of rules that you think. But that's where choice of relocation comes into play.
Sorry, and I also didn't mean to indicate that there's never a deviant aspect of it, but I think the heart of that desire is out of sickness. And
I want to jump in here because deviant doesn't necessarily mean criminal either.
Oh, absolutely not.
The general populace a lot of times will look at deviant as something that is criminal, and this is something that is really harped on in psychology in general, is that you have abnormal behavior, you have deviant behavior, and you have intentionally criminal behavior. And so I just wanted to interject that deviant does not necessarily mean criminal. It means that it deviates from the norm.
Right. So I guess I mean to say is that this is, at the heart of it, is abnormal.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I had a friend who described, he's like, if you're attracted to a person, that's a fetish. And there's I really wish I could remember the philosopher who had put this idea forward, but basically the idea is like any sort of attraction, whatever it is, it's a fetish, and so everybody has a fetish. Some are more normalized than others, so all fetishes are okay as long as everybody's consenting and old enough.
Yeah, that's always the difficult argument, because old enough changes country to country and culture to culture. Or maybe a better way to phrase that is society to society, whether that society is a fairly small scope or a large scope.
Well, I guess you could say not age is, typically we say age, but I can think of a particular, if you have someone who has a mental retardation, can they consent? So maybe consent is the better word. Somebody who is non-minor consenting. I'm not exactly sure what labels I need to throw in there to get this idea across.
Well, it perfectly illustrates how or why this is such a difficult subject. Because I think, so I don't know of anybody in their right mind, and I don't mean that disparagingly, but I don't know of anybody in their right mind who would think that anybody under the age of, let's say, 15 could consent and or should consent to anything. That target should certainly be a protected group. Now, the reason I picked 15 is intentional. It's because, if I'm not mistaken, there are a couple of states who recognize 15 as a legal age of consent. If not, it's 16. But I think there are a couple that still recognize 15.
Right. I know in Alabama it's 16 because I knew someone who made a comment, 15 will get you 20.
Okay, so it may at least be up to 16 fairly ubiquitously. But either way, from a behavioral standpoint, that's a bullshit number. And it should be higher.
So I thought it was interesting because there's also a 3-year rolling period as well. So if you're 15 and if there's a 15 and 8-year-old, there's this 3-year window where it's not statutory rape because of the age. So like a 15-year-old could not, well, I don't want to say could not, but there is some protections if a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old did things. So it's very,
it's convoluted for sure.
It has to be.
Right.
And every case probably, I expect that every case has its own set of details and merits and so forth. But we are people, and there's a lot that goes on, and different people, like you said. I like that. It's like just because you're like in Alabama 16, just because you're old enough doesn't mean that it should happen. Like there's I take, significant issue even if somebody my age and a 16-year-old did things like that's problematic for other reasons. It's not necessarily technically illegal, and I'm sure the parents have some set of rights, but there's something going on there.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that, I mean, the age of consent was born about because there was not a better way to measure it or to put some restriction on it, right? And it was also born from the recognition of longer lifespans as opposed to previous years. It should be a reevaluated and ever evolving thing that gets us to a better point, and it hasn't been revisited as far as I can tell since it was set up. I'm sure it has been, but it is not something that's reevaluated in a way of any meaningful at any meaningful level, and should be. But that's kind of the same thing with any age restriction.
Yeah.
But that's also technically a different topic.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, if you want to go into at this point, this is like after show material.
Yeah. Well, let's, I guess at this point, is there anything else that you specifically wanted to kind of mention with relation to Apple's initiatives, or have we kind of touched on everything at this point? I
think we've touched on everything that at least I'm able to touch on, and that's why I veered into a different direction or gone down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, the only thing I do want to wrap up with a general statement. Like I 100% agree with Apple's initiatives and the reason behind them, both in general as just a person and as a parent. What I am concerned about, and I want to emphasize that there's a concern about whether or not Apple will be able to fend off or refrain from expanding this particular program to include things that they should not necessarily include, things that target a specific group for some agenda reasons and not something that seems to be a generally good protection. And of course, who you ask is going to, of course, change whether they think this is a good protection or not, I'm sure, too. But as a whole, I certainly stand behind the idea of hopefully eliminating the spread of CSAM material. I don't think that goal is going to ever be met because there will always be alternative,
It's always a game of cat and mouse.
Right. So I don't think it will go away, but anything that will help halt it or help identify those who are proliferating such material, I'm on board with. And only time will tell whether any of the concerns bear fruit or if this program is allowed to remain in its shell, so to speak, and be scoped to what it has been presented as.
We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work, or are interested in listening to our new after-show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.